You're watching BionicDance. Don't run on automatic, instead, please think.
Now, while I appreciate the response, I once again find myself having to explain the same things over and over again that tend to fly over the heads of most atheists who watch my videos.
A quote commonly attributed to Albert Einstein is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again but expecting different results. If your videos don't seem to be going over as you intend, do you begin to think maybe it might not be the atheist's fault? Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. We're back with that guy from yesterday, and he's made yet another response. In my last video, I rather foolishly, I suppose, gave him credit for understanding terminology and employing logic. So this time we're going to get a bit more specific.
Me saying her name multiple times is not even a relevant issue, unless it's supposed to be one of her many ways, implicit or explicit, in which she likes to take jabs at those whom she is responding to.
Taking jabs, you say? You think pointing out a quirk in your delivery is a jab? Okay, well, let's do a bit of a comparison, shall we?
My friends, this is sad. I'm really disappointed. Is this seriously the best she has to offer? It is absolutely pathetic, and there's really not much more I can say about it. It's just sad. It really is.
I'd say there's a difference between a bit of good-natured ribbing about you saying my name a lot and an outright insult. Wouldn't you?
What I don't understand about atheists like BionicDance is that they like to play this game of minor versus major. This appeal is problematic for several reasons. First of all, it doesn't matter how quote-unquote major a sin is to an atheist. They think eternal punishment in hell isn't justifiable.
What he doesn't seem to get is that it's the eternal part to which many of us object. You do the crime, you do the time, sure. But how can you truly justify infinite punishment for a finite crime? Another part is that it's not just incarceration or being denied your God's presence, as if anybody wants that or even thinks it's a genuine possibility in the first place. The punishment is torture, lake of fire and all that. If you don't see how that shit's unreasonable, unjustifiable all on its own, I'm not sure I can help you. But think of it like this. Person A steals $5 from person B and gets caught. From then until death, person A has to give $5 to B as payback every day. Assuming person A is 30 years old and will live until 80, 50 years, 365 days a year, $5 each day, that comes to $91,250 for a $5 crime. Are you going to tell me that's reasonable? Now, consider that for the crime of masturbation, your God will at the very least allow someone to be tortured forever. By comparison, the $91K is nothing, drop in the bucket, and the crime is far worse for the $5 as it actually does harm against somebody against their will. Are you really going to expect me to think your God is just plain hunky-dory? Seriously?
Even someone as bad as Hitler from their perspective would necessarily have to hit a threshold limit of punishment for his crimes, as surely even his beyond sick and twisted acts cannot measure up to an eternal level of punishment.
What do you want me to say? That even Hitler doesn't deserve eternity and make it sound like I approve of him in some fashion? You can throw extreme examples at me all you like, but it's not going to change the basic premise of my position on eternal torture. If nothing else, you're basically advocating eye for an eye justice, and I thought we were supposed to be better than that.
So, because of this alone, this idea of minor versus major is thus a total non sequitur with the real issue with eternal hell, as no level of sin justifies it, according to their logic.
And this misses the point entirely. There are certain sins which can provably be shown to harm nobody, which at worst hurt your God's feelings a little. And then there are sins which harm other people. If you insist on using Hitler as an example, fine. He had millions of people killed. Pretty horrible, right? The problem is that the punishments are the same. Eternal torture for something fairly petty versus mass genocide, and both get exactly the same horror done to them unto infinity. Justify that, if you can.
Second of all, another problem with this game is that they cannot have a sufficient demarcation line for measuring minor versus major. Even as she admits later on in this video, she doesn't even think good and evil exists, so she cannot think sin exists either.
Well, I don't. And this is a problem how exactly? I'm an atheist, and I am so because religionoids have never shown their belief to have a factual basis. Given that sin is a religious concept and religion remains unproved, how do you expect me to believe in sin? But that doesn't mean I can't criticize your system. As I said, I see no factual basis for it, and I'm perfectly justified in pointing that out, and why. As for your fabled demarcation line, no, there isn't one. We're all improvising. Fortunately, there's enough overlap on what people will and won't accept being done to themselves or the public at large that we're not without an accepted system of justice. Your desperate need for 100% certainty regarding morals, and that of many theists, is a huge point of contention here.
As Christians, people like me believe in putting our fleshly ideas of good and evil aside and only watching God sovereignly lay the standard.
Standards you can't prove are true. Standards that often have not a damn thing to do with changing other people's lives for better or worse. Forgive me if I don't trust your dogma and doctrine. You try to claim I cannot justify my standards, but you've decided that a magical creature you can't even prove exists has a monopoly on morality which must be followed no matter how arbitrary. And somehow my own, more material and practical side is the goofy one. Okay.
So yes, it may feel uncomfortable to me at times that God's perfect standard isn't always something to my liking, but my feelings don't matter. It's about what God says, whether you like it or not.
Which hinges on God's existence, of course. But tell me, would you accept this like it or not from anybody else? What makes God so damned special? Plenty of gods throughout human history have been jerks or bunglers, but somehow yours got to be perfect in every way. Apparently. Convenient.
A lot of people think it's irrational to go to jail for possessing marijuana, but it's still the law in many places in the United States. Feelings don't matter.
Well, apparently you would accept it from someone else. But hey, a couple of states have legalized weed because some people wanted it and could show it did no harm, even did some good for some things, medical conditions and the like. Annoyingly, it doesn't seem to help my epilepsy like they said it might, but hey, what you gonna do? But because people could justify showing marijuana as harmless and felt it being illegal was a bad idea, the law changed. Feelings can make a difference.
You cannot simply point the finger at God for allegedly having irrational standards when you cannot even get past the consistently terrible standards as humans have.
Do I really need to point out, again, all of the horrible shit the biblical God is alleged to have done, and the horrible shit done in his name? Global genocide, not merely of humans but of animals, with that whole Ark incident, having babies dashed against rocks, or the firstborn of Egypt being killed, having people being stoned to death or burned at the stake, the Inquisition, the Crusades. I can tell you those are things I'd never do. But forget my own standards for a minute. Are these really things you're prepared to accept just because your God says so? Would you do them yourself if commanded?
You like to argue a common premise. Well, us humans find this illogical, so why would we think God is any better? Well, I'll tell you the exact opposite. I says whatever he says is sin, so why would you think humans know better than him?
Because some of the things he says are sin are fucking ludicrous, that's why. On Friday I must be a vegetarian lest I disobey God and commit a sin. What the fuck? The jury seems to still be out on whether that's a mortal sin, but it's still ridiculous. And it's not the only standard that's so damn screwy. Yeah, I know better than your dumbass God, even if it turns out he really is real. Keep that in mind, too. Nobody has proved your God real, so they're probably following rules written by humans who claim they're God's rules. If that were proved to be true, would you still follow those dogma, or would you say whoops and look appropriately embarrassed?
BionicDance? Have you ever considered the things we find illogical should have long taken us to a utopia by now?
Even after several millennia of people trying to trust to God's commands, we've never reached a utopia. In fact, it's pretty reasonable to say that we've gotten to where we are in spite of religion. If anything teaches people to hate, it's theist dogma. Hate women, hate gays, hate foreigners and infidels or heathens. Hate everybody who doesn't conform to be just like us. A lot of people like to whitewash those parts of the Abrahamic faiths to pretend they're not part of their religion. But last I checked, lying, even to yourself, is one of those sin things we keep talking about.
The bottom line is that you trying to put humans on a pedestal doesn't exactly work out for you, no matter how much you reject God's commands and his judging of eternal punishment for those who reject him.
I'm not putting humans on a pedestal. Remember, I'm an atheist. I don't think your God exists. That means humans are all there is. Well, at least so far. I'd love to be in touch with a sentient extraterrestrial species if I could. But if you want me to accept anything your God says, you're gonna have to get beyond faith and start proving he's real beyond reasonable doubt.
Well, let's go with your eternal empty plane example. You are literally just talking about the same or similar sort of existence we experience now, except with eternity tied to it. It's easy for you to talk like it would be just some good time right here and now, but the fact of the matter is that you absolutely cannot conceive that possibility to be the case. All you really can do is assume and speculate, but I thought you atheists didn't like making claims without evidence.
Except I didn't make a claim. I described an alternate possibility to the lake of fire concept. The only claim I made was about which one I was convinced I'd prefer, which one sounded better. So don't go putting words in my mouth, kiddo. It's dishonest. Well, either that or being so absorbed in winning the argument that you didn't even notice how badly you'd straw-manned my position.
You have absolutely no evidence that being left in an empty plane for eternity is somehow better than an eternal lake of fire.
In one case, you're in constant pain from which there is no relief. In the other case, you're not. Do I need to draw you a diagram?
Do you really think that it would be impossible for things like someone like Hitler or worse being created in that eternal plane? And if that were to happen, you'd have absolutely no escape because death doesn't exist. You'd simply have to assume that without the presence of God on an empty eternal plane, you and those there would operate just fine.
So, think about just how many things are wrong with your scenario. First, if death doesn't exist, then Ghost Hitler couldn't set up death camps. Pretty elementary, that. Second, I thought a huge punishment was simply supposed to be being cut off from God. Why is more necessary? Third, like I said, part of the problem is the eternal torment. If Hitler did the crime and did his time in the fiery torture barn, however many thousands of years that might be, and was then released, do you think he might have learned his lesson? Fourth, what's the point of punishment anyway? We do it on Earth to, like I said, teach people lessons, to make them think twice next time. But if the torment is eternal, what lesson is being taught? And if the God passing the sentences refuses to reveal his existence, insisting on faith instead, how does anybody really know there's a lesson to be learned? A kindergarten teacher is a better disciplinarian than him.
The bottom line is that it's not always about what's better to you, but about what brings you truly to a submissive foundation and repentance in Christ.
Says you. I see no reason to think the Christ fellow is real. Prove it.
And this is the problem with you atheists. You want to take everything for yourself and glorify yourselves. You are not thankful nor want to return thanks to God for what you have.
You mean the God you theists have managed to never prove? That God? Believe me, I can come up with much better games of pretend than believing in a magical sky fairy that wants me for his submissive little bitch. Being one of the Bionic Six, for example. Tons more fun.
The point was that God could have simply sent those who got flooded in the past and us today to eternal hell from the beginning, with literally no chance of forgiveness.
But then what would have been the point in creating humans in the first place? You don't even touch that part. Building humans just to send them to hell sounds remarkably like an anthill and a 6-year-old with a magnifying glass.
BionicDance, you truly don't understand the intellectual bankruptcy of your argument. In your worldview, there is no level of morality which can be greater or lesser because it's all your opinion at the end of the day.
Like I said before, we're all on our own when it comes to morality, but fortunately there's a lot of overlap between person to person. How is that intellectually bankrupt? Sounds more to me like you just don't like it.
Point is, your worldview leads to all sorts of absurdity and self-contradictory nonsense.
Yours isn't any better. Just because God says so doesn't mean it's objectively the case. To be objective, something must be able to exist even if there are no minds to maintain it, including a God's mind. Assume for a moment that God doesn't exist, and then take a rule like, say, not committing adultery. If all humanity was wiped out, would that rule still exist? How? If there are no minds to think it's wrong, how can it be wrong? How can it be right? How can it be anything? If a God created that rule, how would it be any different? God gets wiped out along with humanity, the rule goes with him. All of morality is subjective. All of it.
There is no greater or worse in your worldview. There is just your opinion, and your opinion simply isn't sufficient to lay a claim to what's greater or worse.
And no matter how much you may want to think otherwise, you don't have any objective standard either. All you have, assuming your God is real, is your God's subjective opinion. Like I said, all of morality is subjective opinion. You're judging behavior and whether you like it the same way you would judge a movie, book, or song. And, as I said, there's plenty of overlap between people. A huge, huge majority doesn't much care for being hurt and are definitely opposed to being killed. They've all gotten together to say that those who think otherwise should be stopped for the benefit of us all. That may not be objective, but it's enough to justify enforcing it. And don't go telling me my worldview, especially since you've quite badly misunderstood it. That's for me to tell you.
I was trying to find out where is the demarcation line atheists draw and what's evil and how they would go about doing so.
And that's your mistake. Atheism is not a faith with a rule book like religions have. You're not going to get one single answer from every atheist, any more than you're going to get one single answer from every religion, or even from every sect or faction within a single religion. The Amish are Christian, but definitely hold different values and rules than, say, a Baptist or a Protestant. You say you're looking for some fabled demarcation line for atheists, but not even your own religion has one. And much like the secular values, most religions have a lot of overlap on which things are acceptable and which aren't. And that is how we get the rules people tend to live by, even though there does tend to be some disagreement on the particulars.
The Godhead Trinity are not three of the same persons. All are separate persons, yet all equally God. Second, what was sacrificed was his bodily flesh, not his God divinity.
But why did anything need to be sacrificed at all? Couldn't God just change the rules without the blood and guts execution? Why was having a guy killed necessary? It just plain doesn't make sense, and I've never heard an explanation that didn't completely beggar logic.
Third, because the Godhead Trinity are separate persons, Jesus was doing the will of the Father, not appeasing himself.
Do you even hear what you're saying? Jesus is doing the will of the Father, in other words, doing what he tells himself to do, and being sacrificed to make his Father happy for some insane reason when Captain Omnipotence could totally do all of this shit without having anybody tortured to death. Seriously, think about it.
Jesus did it obediently and willingly, so he couldn't have been appeasing himself.
You miss the point. If Jesus and God and the Holy Ghost are all the same person, if somehow separate, and one of them requires a sacrifice of another, and without that senseless slaughter, I say senseless because despite plenty of research, I have yet to find a single explanation why it was necessary to have a slaughter, God wasn't prepared to restore his relationship with humanity, which simply makes no sense if God is supposed to be all-powerful and shouldn't need a sacrifice. Seriously, think about it. Try connecting those dots. You can't do it.
This is really no different than a parent offering their child an out for something they did wrong, but the child simply refuses to correct their behavior and take that out. Then all the parent is left with is no choice but to punish their child accordingly.
It's completely different. This is the parent saying, I'm going to give you an out, but first your older brother has to commit suicide. Unless Tommy slashes his wrists, you're still going to be in trouble. Make that make sense. I dare you.
Like many atheists, she thinks God being all-powerful means that he simply just has to forgive us, and that's a wrap. If God just simply forgives us, then there is no necessity for punishment at all.
Another complete misunderstanding of my point. When I say just forgive us, I'm talking about the forgiveness that Jesus allegedly bought for us with his life, the reestablishment of man's relationship to God. I'm not talking about each individual's everyday sins here. Why couldn't God just do what he apparently needed the crucifixion to do without it?
The foundation of their entire lives is simply matter and motion. spin-offs of biological evolution. The problem is they don't act and live like they are simply byproducts of matter and motion.
Oh? You say that as if you know how matter in motion would behave, and that it definitely wouldn't behave as life that has evolved through natural selection has. You've asked me to justify assertions for which you say I have no basis, claims you think I made with no way to explain. Now it's your turn.
If all sources are only offering their opinions, then tell me why you, BionicDance, act as if there is someone right and someone wrong between us two. Your actions are not consistent with your claims.
I'm pointing out that your claims have no basis in verifiable fact, that what you think is objective has no real-world, mind-external basis, which is the very definition of objective.
Take care, God bless, and peace.
May the Force be with you. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think.
And remember, if it can't be in your hand, it's all in your head.